From the early 9th century to the late 19th century, in the lands of the rising sun, a caste of warriors would exist that has left a massive impact on Japanese and global culture. Games like Sekiro Shadow Dies Twice and Ghost of Tsushima, or shows like Demon Slayer and Hell's Paradise, and even movies like Kill Bill and John Wick wouldn't exist without this ancient caste of people. I, of course, am talking about the Knights of the East, the Samurai. I will be teaching you the history of these fascinating warriors that you never knew. Our story begins in Heian period Japan with the Emishi people of the north, a horse-riding nomadic people who existed in northern Honshu. The Emishi people were conquered in 811 by the Heian forces and were assimilated into Japanese culture. The horse-riding archers of the Emishi would not simply fade out of existence, however, with their methods of horseback archery being favoured by the emperor as a way to better control the provinces. Due to this, those who were trained in this way of combat were hired by the emperor and the daimyo, the wealthy landowners of Japan. Slowly over the course of time, the central government in Yamato, later renamed to Kyoto, became less concerned with actually running the country, and would be challenged by the Minamoto and Terari clans, who with the backing of the samurai took control of the nation and established the first shogunate in Kamakura in 1192. The shogunate was a military government run by the samurai, specifically the highest ranking samurai, the shogun. In 1274, the Mongol hordes under Kublai Khan had conquered China and Korea and wanted to continue east to Japan. The first invasion started in 1274 when 900 ships set sail from Korea. The ships would first land on the islands of Tsushima and Iki on the 5th of November, where they sieged the islands for 8 days. The Mongols would face harsh resistance as samurai forces would fight back, being led by Sosukani. The samurai forces on Tsushima would fall to the Mongols due to the Mongols' superior numbers. Meanwhile, on Iki, the Mongol forces would more easily overwhelm the Japanese forces, pushing them back to Hitsume Castle, where the Mongols would finally defeat them. They would continue southeast, landing on Hikataka Bay on the 19th of November, where a battle between samurai and Mongol forces would rage on for 18 days. However, between battles, the Mongols would take up the curious tactic of retreating back to their ships and sailing out of the bay. This would be a terrible mistake on behalf of the Mongols, as on the 7th of December 1274, a typhoon would strike the Mongol fleet, destroying a whole third of the army. This would result in the Mongol forces retreating back to Korea. A year later, in 1275, an ambassador would be sent to Japan demanding that the shogunate pay tribute to the Mongol Empire. The shogunate would respond to this by beheading the ambassador on a beach near Kamakura. The Mongols would send another army to Japan in June of 1281 from China, consisting of 4,500 ships which held 100,000 men. They would again successfully invade Tsushima on the 9th of June and Iki on the 14th, landing in Hakataka Bay. Again on the 23rd of June, 1281, the fleet would split in two, with one going north to Honshu, where they would be fought off at Nagato, while back in Hakataka, the Japanese would do a better job of expelling the Mongol invaders, since they made sure to fortify Hakataka after the last invasion. This would stop the Mongols from being able to properly establish themselves on the beach. The Japanese would push the Mongols out of Hakataka, causing them to first withdraw to Shiga, then to Noki, then to Iki Island, all the while getting harassed by Japanese ships. The Khan would then send reinforcements from South China, comprised of another 100,000 men, who would join the Mongol fleet and would target Hiriedo. The fleet would attack Takashima on August 12, 1281. The battle would rage on for 2 days until a typhoon would destroy a whole 2/3 of the fleet, resulting in them having to retreat back to China. The incredible luck of a typhoon destroying 2 Mongol invasions would cause the Japanese to give these typhoons a nickname, the Winds of God, or Kamikaze. The Mongols would not attempt another invasion again, and Japan would not face another invasion till World War II. Despite this, Japan would still beef up their military after the Mongol invasions in case of another invasion. In 1333, a daimyo samurai family called the Ashikages would overthrow the shogunate in Kamakura and move the capital back to Kyoto. However, the new Ashikaga shogunate would not nearly be as powerful as their predecessors in Kamakura. Between the 15th and 16th centuries, the power of the shogun and the central government would be non-existent, and the daimyo would begin to fight amongst themselves over territorial claims. This instability would lead to all of Japan being plunged into a century-and-a-half-long civil war known as the Sengoku Jidai, or the Era of Warring States. In 1467, the early days of the Sengoku Jidai, a war would break out in Kyoto, known as the Onibunami War. The conflict began when several clans attempted to take control of Kyoto and the shogun, Ashikage Yoshimasa. The Eastern Army would be led by Hosokawa Katsumoto and fought against Yamana Sozan, who led his army from the west. The war would be extremely destructive, with all of Kyoto being affected. The damage done to the capital would only add fuel to the fire that was the Sengoku Jidai. In 1568, Oda Nobunaga would successfully march his army on Kyoto and overthrow the 15th shogun, Ashikage Yoshikage. The Sengoku Jidai period would ultimately conclude with the unification of Japan under Toyotomi Hideyoshi in 1590. There would also be a smaller Azuchi Momoyama period that concluded in 1603 with the reunification of Japan being completed by Tokugawa Ieyasu. Along with this, Tokugawa would close the nation's borders to all foreigners and move the capital to the east, Edo, later renamed Tokyo. The Edo period, which lasted from 1603 to 1868, would mark the beginning of the Tokugawa family's control over the daimyo, and by extension, all of Japan. The daimyo would be forced to stay in Edo for parts of the year, and have their families kept in Edo to ensure they could in no way revolt against the shogunate. Along with this, a caste system would be put in place, and the caste of samurai would be ranked very highly alongside farmers, artisans, and merchants. However, as the Edo period continued, and Japan felt the effects of long-lasting peace, the samurai became less and less important, and would be surpassed in wealth by other classes such as the merchants. As a result of this, many samurai would end up living in relative poverty, and many would become ronin, who were bandit samurais with no masters. The Edo period would come to its conclusion in 1853, when Japan's borders would be opened after an American naval officer named Matthew Perry arrived in Japan, ending the 2-century-long isolation from the outside world. Shortly after, the old feudal ways of governance would be thrown out in favour for a more modern, westernized form of government. The Edo period finally came to an end in 1868 with the Meiji Restoration, and along with it, the samurai would be abolished. One thing that the samurai are most famous for is their armour. Samurai armour, like all other armours, has evolved over many years of its existence. Samurai armour was made out of leather, iron, wood, steel, cotton, and for the more wealthy samurai, silk. The armour's main components were kozan, which is laquedated iron and leather scales that vary in size. They were attached to a male backing called kurasi, which was sewn onto cloth or leather. The colour of samurai armour comes from the odishi, which was the lacing they used to hold the armour together. The odishi was often made of cotton, wool, or silk. In the 16th century, these lamellar armour were replaced with plate armour in order to better defend from guns. The samurai armour itself consisted of 13 pieces. The kabuto, which was their helmet, the meppio, which was the mask covering their face, the shireko, which was the aventail that hanged from the kabuto, the nodawa, which was the throat armour, and the do, which was the breastplate. There was also the kurzi, which was a skirt that guarded the hips and loin, the sode, which were shoulder guards, the hideate, which were thigh guards, the sunite, which were greaves, the kogek, which were armoured socks, kegetsu, which were bearskin boots. Heian-era samurai wore the oyori armour, which was boxy armour that mainly spec'd into covering the front, back and left side from arrow fire, while a plate named the waivate protected the right side. This armour was quite loose in order to make space between the armour and the torso to better stop arrows. The samurai armour would change yet again in the Kamakura period. While the oyori would still be prevalent throughout the higher ranking samurai, the average samurai would be using the newer Dumaru. The Dumaru was effectively the same as the Oyori, with the main difference being that it was much more form-fitting, allowing for better mobility in one-on-one combat, with the Dumaru being 20 kilograms on average, and the Oyori being 30 kilograms. In the Muromachi period, the Haramaki armor would become the new norm. At this point, the Oyori was nothing but an antique. This new armor was connected at the back with cords that tied the armor closed. The Kozans were also made slightly larger, causing lacing to be much more sparse. In the Azuchi Momoyama period, the model of Japanese warfare changed due to the Sengoku Jidai. The armies mainly consisted of peasants who couldn't afford armor, being led by more traditional samurai. At this point, the Toshi Gosaku had become the standard for samurai. This armor was much more stronger in order to be more effective against gunfire. The lace that would be used to construct the scales of the lamler being replaced with iron rivets. Some variants of this armor got rid of Kozan entirely, instead using a more European style of plate cuirass. The Edo period, being the time of widespread peace that it was, no longer had a need for big battle armor. Instead, the Kiriko would be developed, which weighed less than old types of armor and were more easily concealed. The armor was made of many small hexagons of iron sewn onto cloth. This has been my video summarizing the history of samurai. There were many topics throughout this video I was unable to discuss, but I hope I still spread some light on this incredible group of warriors. Please like, share, and subscribe if you would like to see more videos like this.